with us today a special guest, Jeremy Ben-Ami, who, as many of you know, heads J Street, which is the progressive pro-Israel Jewish organization, actually Jews and non-Jews as well. And he is here to talk to us about the big Iran thud, the dud, the lie that produced nothing. Trump essentially went along with Bibi's pretext that, oh, yes, Iran is on the verge of actually completing the bomb, meaning, putting the parts together. No evidence that is true. He went ahead, dispensed the bombers, dropped bombs on 3 sites, including Fordo, and then declares to the country, destroyed.
Obliterated.
Everything. Yes,
Obliterated.
Yes, yeah, the great leader has spoken. Turns out, Jeremy, to my shock, I thought, all right, maybe we'll get a couple years setback in the program. A matter of months. We did this all for a matter of months, setting back the Iran program. What the heck is going on here?
Well, I think it's really important to note that has been what proponents of diplomacy have been saying since we were debating the JCPOA back in 2013, 14, 15, in that range. The argument has always been that you've got the military option, it's always there, but if you use it, you're only going to set the program back by a limited period, whether it's months or a year, optimistically, maybe even 2 years. But the only way to have a long-term, verifiable way to put Iran's nuclear program in a box is through diplomacy. And that's what we did with the JCPOA. So we've known for as long as Norm and I have known each other, we have known that military action has a limit. And this is what the intelligence community is beginning to leak out now. I will say this is one report and it's low confidence, and I don't want to overstate it. There's got to be other analyses, and nobody's, the International Atomic Energy Agency hasn't been in there. So we don't know the truth yet, right? This is one report, but this is what a lot of us were saying for 15 years now.
Exactly. And one thing to point out, Jeremy, I think at the time of the JCPOA, Iran had 3-point change in enriched material, enrichment. In other words, the materials had been enriched up a little over 3%. Before we started bombing, they had storehouses of actual enriched materials, which they didn't have before, up to 60%. They then scurried away truckloads of this stuff. At this point, do we know where this stuff is? And do we have anybody on the ground, since we have no JCPOA, who could figure this out for us?
Right. You've raised the 2 key points. One is, that they didn't have this material before Trump broke the agreement in 2018. They now have this material. And when you had inspectors and you had an agreement, you knew where the material was. And now we don't know where the material is. And the whole risk of military action is that they take this material and they take their knowledge and they take whatever equipment they've got, they rebuild. And then with no one watching in a place of their choosing and a time of their choosing, they simply race to have a nuclear weapon. It's called sneak out, right? It's not a race out. They're going to sneak out to a bomb. The issue isn't the, percentage in terms of, that isn't the quantity. The enrichment level that you need to make a nuclear weapon is 90% purity. And civilian only requires 3.67% to 5%. So it's a very different level of enrichment. And the faster you spin the centrifuges and the more you chain the reactions together, that's how you get the purer uranium.
Right. Jeremy, what is the incentive now for Iran not to race to a bomb? They've just been taught the big lesson that because they didn't actually have a nuclear weapon, the US and Israel beat the crap out of them. Isn't there more incentive for them to race ahead?
Right. And, this is sort of again, if you think about it from geostrategy, what did Libya and Iraq and Syria learn? if you don't have the nuclear weapon, then somebody's going to come in and attack you and take it away. What did North Korea learn? Well, if you race to the bomb and you have it, nobody's going to take it away from you. And so this is, again, the incentive structure, but this is the kind of strategic thinking that those who believe in, using the hammer first and asking questions later don't engage in, right? There's no strategic thinking about this. And we've been arguing this argument for years and years and years. But this incentive question, now they have every incentive in the world to what quote unquote sneak out is what we call it, rather than race out towards having nuclear weapons capability.
Jeremy, this isn't a liberal versus conservative divide. It's common sense versus recklessness. And in fact, conservative support. I was on the Washington Institute working group where you had the likes of Stephen Hadley laying out the parameters. Just reflect a little bit on, is this a liberal issue?
Right. Well, it certainly is one of those issues where you get a strange bedfellows alliance, right? You had George W. Bush and Trump won, by the way, saying to Israel, "Do not bomb." Right? Olmert in 2006 came to George W. Bush with a plan to bomb the Iranian nuclear facilities, and George W. Bush said no, and Barack Obama said no, and Trump once said no, and Biden said no, and so this has been across the board. And you're right, in the sort of center of American foreign policy, you find this coalescence of Republican and Democratic people who've been at this for decades, who understand the nuances here, and who say this is just not the strategic way to go about doing this.
Right. Now, Jeremy, you know that we were actually on opposite sides of the issue once upon a time when it came to the JCPOA, because I thought it wasn't strong enough and it was going to expire. But once it was in place and Trump pulled the plug with nothing to substitute, I thought that was incredibly stupid. Better an imperfect deal where there's some limits, we can fix things as we go along. And now what's your game plan? And the entire, sort of right wing hawkish group said, oh, don't worry about it. We'll force them to do something. We'll use our strength. They never had another plan because ultimately you eventually have to come back to the bargaining table. Now, maybe Trump will be able to negotiate something now. But I asked both of you this sort of metaphysical question, which I'm going to write on for tomorrow. How do you make a deal with Donald Trump, who is the most unreliable person in the world and won't even stand by Article 5 of NATO? I don't have any love for the Iranians. It's an evil regime. They're untrustworthy. They cheat. But how do you make a deal with Donald Trump?
Norm?
That's a diplomatic question, Norm.
I do not think that the Iranians are now going to move into a deal posture, Jen. You can see, and the Europeans, and there may be a silver lining to this. When I was ambassador, Jeremy actually visited me with his family when I was ambassador. When I was ambassador, um, I was pressing the Europeans to meet their defense spending commitment, their 2% of GDP commitment. Now they've set a 5%, and they should, because Donald Trump is totally unreliable, including when it comes to those Article 5 mutual defense commitments. So I think Donald Trump, another negative of this situation, and I'll pass to Jeremy, is Donald Trump has taken that same deal that could have protected us, our ally Israel, the Middle East, and the region off the table. Now there are trunk loads of nuclear fissile material hidden around Iran. He's made the world more dangerous permanently until we once again have a pro-democracy government here in the United States.
Right. And even if we have by the way,
Yep.
even if we have a pro-democracy government here in the United States, American credibility is so deeply damaged, right? This is even a sane and rational government coming into power, hopefully, January 20th of 2029, that wants to come back into some form of diplomacy. now faces the skepticism of the world that what do you know about 4 years from now, and will the next president just come along and reverse course? And this undermines America's place permanently. It's not just for as long as this government's in place. Even if the forces of sanity come back into power, this is going to damage us for the long term.
I couldn't agree more, Jeremy. Let's switch topics to another horror, and that is this reconciliation bill. It's essentially a grotesque bargain. We're going to take health care and food assistance away from millions and millions of people so we can partially pay for tax cuts for billionaires and at the same time explode the debt. No one can justify this on the merits. That's why Republicans continue to lie about it. The other day, I'm reliably told that Tom Dillis, who's up for reelection, was passing around documents at the lunch that the Senate Republicans have on Tuesday showing the cuts to Medicaid. I hope those were sheets from our friends at CAP because they're very reliable and very helpful. But he was saying, look, all these people are going to lose health care. Well, let's hope he remembers that when it comes time to voting. Norm?
Gillis said, "This is our Obamacare," because you'll remember Obamacare. I was there in the White House for it. It led to the Tea Party and what, but Obamacare was good policy.
Yes.
This is garbage.
Yes, exactly. You know, you've been on the political side of things, Jeremy. If you're sitting for reelection, how do you deal with something like this? It seems to be like a political death sentence for Republicans to line up behind this one.
Yeah, no, look, I go back, as Norm indicated at the beginning, I go back to the Clinton years and, very well remember some of the things that Republicans were proposing back in 94 when the Gingrich Revolution came back. And the entirety of the 96 campaign was based on, what were Republicans intending to do to Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. And Clinton won in basically a landslide, and we kept the House. We ended up balancing the budget. I mean, it was completely based on what the Republicans were trying to do along these lines. This is the greatest possible political vulnerability for Republicans. As much as all of us and everybody watching cares about our democracy and about the rule of law and the Constitution, it's the economic issues. And I was in the war room in 92. It's the economy, stupid. And it is going to be the issue on which the Republicans have the greatest vulnerability in 26.
Absolutely. Now, why, given that, are Republicans willing to walk the plank anyway? Is this the fear of getting primaried from the right, do you think, Norm? Is this physical fear of Donald Trump and his lunatics? Why, knowing this is such a bad vote, put aside the morality, they don't care about that. Why would they sacrifice themselves for a bill this horrible when they know that puts them in greater political danger?
It's a cowardice cocktail of those ingredients, Jen. They are cowed by the unpleasantness of being singled out by Donald Trump and the potential electoral consequences. The the old saying, "I belong to no organized political party. I'm a Democrat." The Republicans are very different. They are they are, and we're going to talk about that a little bit, friends, with the outcome in the New York mayor's race and the Democratic Big Tent, and how that can be a superpower for us uh, on the pro democracy side of the political spectrum. But the Republican Party is very regimented. And then there is the element that you point out of physical fear.
Yeah.
I saw this in the first impeachment when uh, a number of Republican senators came in and begged us to cut the impeachment process short because it was creating restiveness among the grassroots, and those people are violent and crazy. And that is, we have seen political violence, including targeting legislators, state legislators, the tragedy in Minnesota.
Exactly.
Um, Nancy Pelosi's husband, Paul Pelosi, the softball, congressional softball game and more. So we've seen this specter, and they are scared. And that is well known. They are scared for themselves, their families, that if they stand up to Donald Trump. So that is a kind of autocratic recipe. Fortunately, judges are brave, the litigants are brave, the clients are brave, and I think we have seen now increasing amounts of courage in the pro-democracy political class at the federal, state. And you had a wonderful interview with Mayor Karen Bass
Yes,
yesterday. Her city is occupied by federal troops.
it was remarkable. First of all, Mayor Bass is just the picture of steel and poise after what her city has been through. I half expected, to see like puffs of smoke and, battle damage around her, but she's in command. And it was interesting, Jeremy. What she says is these people have nothing to do. They're standing around because, of course, LA was never out of control, and now there's nothing going on. Is this a good idea when we have a dangerous world to have military people on the streets of Los Angeles? This seems to be not a good idea on multiple levels.
Right. And of course, how much it's costing, right? I mean, this is the thing for the party that is worried about the debt and his fiscal discipline and all these big spending Democrats. The amount of money that these things cost, whether it's the deployment there or the deployment at the border or it's the parade or whatever it is, the money that's being wasted on things that are doing absolutely nothing for people. And yet we're cutting the programs that are helping people. There's such a target rich environment for the Democrats to run on here, and
Absolutely.
I really hope that they're able to keep the focus on what is this government doing for you.
Absolutely. And Jeremy, speaking of a target rich environment and campaigns, you told me something interesting about your background in New York City politics. You ran a campaign, didn't you?
Yeah, no, you stick around long enough in this business, and it turns out you touch everything. When I was in there in 94 and 96 in the White House when we were battling the last tax cut package in 2001, I was running a New York City mayoral campaign with a friend of mine who was, we were running Mark Green's campaign that ended up, the primary took place on 9/11. It was really, one of the most memorable things that has happened in
Oh
my
my.
life and in New York City politics. So, I've been in the thick of New York City politics. I worked for two mayors. I was very involved in local club politics in New York City. So yeah, no, got a bit of back mileage on that issue as well.
Right. So, whoever you are in favor of, and some people are thrilled with the outcome, some people are disappointed, some people are anxious. It is very clear that the New York political establishment is completely broken and inept. If they didn't like Mamdani, who do they rally behind? Andrew Cuomo? How is this possible? And why can't they get their act together if they don't like someone who's a self declared socialist? Why can't they come up with a slate of candidates that people can rally around rather than a disgraced ex governor with a history of sexual harassment?
Well,
Here,
it goes back to Norm's thing about the organized idea of the Democrats having an organized establishment that's actually going to come up with something is pretty ludicrous. That's not New York. It's not the Democratic Party for sure.
It does
I
seem impossible in a city of 8 million people that their apparatus, their political apparatus, is so inept that they actually think that Mario Cuomo is their idea of an acceptable candidate. I also want to,
Mario would have been fine. It's Andrew they had the
on
problem
the
with.
oh, there you go.
on the
Excuse me.
on
Got
the
his
flip
memory, his memory.
on the flip side, and I thought of this when I was watching your interview with Karen. She ran very successfully on that same um, bucket of kitchen table issues and particularly affordable housing. People are being priced out. Average folks, communities of color are being priced out of New York City, and that was a very, very potent
Right.
theme. And I think we have to have a big tent as Democrats, and that is that is the flip side of not being particularly regimented. They were very successful. The Labour Party was very successful in doing this and in winning in the UK. They had a coalition, a Cheney to Chomsky type coalition that organized around a certain number of issues. And I think Democrats have to take that message very clearly. There must be room for a big tent. I know Jeremy tries to do that at J Street on Israel policy. Not everybody in the pro-Israel community appreciates that big tent, Jeremy, but it's a model around one issue of what we have to do more broadly.
Right, and I just want to add one thing, which is that I think it's very important if there is a message to whatever it is that is the Democratic Party establishment, it has to be this message of energy and excitement and new
Yes.
voices. And that put aside socialists, put aside the Intifada, put aside all the other issues, right? What you had was a 33-year-old, really eloquent, exciting, vibrant candidate who was taking on the issues that really matter to people versus a 60-something-year-old, establishment gray guy who, is the voice of the past. And I think that's the thing that we have to understand is there was a energy here, and he was speaking to the people who really cared and were angry and upset about what's going on, and he tapped right into that.
And he did it with social media. He
Right.
did it with a ease in meeting people where they are, which is something we talk about a lot. So if people want to see the dead wood out of the way, they've got to find those candidates who can speak and who can use social media. So if the establishment Republicans, establishment Democrats, Freudian slip, are upset, they should hire Mondani's social media people and put them to work for other candidates because apparently they figured out how to run a really good campaign.
Do you know what's interesting about that is he did have a good social media team. He was his own social media chief. It's
Yes.
like AOC. She does a lot of that herself, and that naturalness in the same way, Cuomo feels comfortable on old media, like going on Meet the Press. That's no longer where it's at. It's new media, including the Contrarians.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us, all of your expertise. I'm going to have to remember your resume next time we're looking for guests because just about any issue you see.
Right, I can cover anything.
Yes, exactly. And you probably fix cars and we'll change the light bulbs too. So thank you so much for joining us. We always end our segments with what are you looking forward to? Jeremy, what are you looking forward to this week?
Well, I'm looking forward to getting away from Washington for a vacation next week. That's what I'm looking forward to.
Excellent.
So, nothing too exciting. I'm heading up to Philly for some friends, but I'm looking forward to getting out of town with some social
That's the
time.
city of my birth. I love
Yeah.
Philadelphia. Norm, what about you? What are you looking forward to?
Well, Jen, the rubber is meeting the road on reconciliation. And the parliamentarian has done such a magnificent job of what we call the bird bath, throwing out all under the bird rule, which allows these purely fiscal bills to pass on 51 votes in the Senate, no filibuster, no cloture. You can only have fiscal measures. So she's thrown out all the crazy stuff like the provision the House Republicans put in. Some said they didn't even read it, limiting federal judges from holding the Trump administration in contempt. So I'm looking forward to the continued contortions of the House and the Senate. I don't think they have the votes right today. And let's see what happens. That is pretty interesting to watch.
Absolutely. I will be featuring her in my Friday feature, by the way, Norm. You almost let the cat out of the bag there because I think Elizabeth McDonough should become a household word. What I am looking forward to has nothing to do with politics. Next week starts my favorite sporting event, any place, anytime, and that's Wimbledon. It's a thing to behold. Yes, it's a little stuffy. It's England, but it's beautiful. The grass, the players, the tradition. I love it. So I am looking forward to Wimbledon. Norm looks puzzled. Jen, Wimbledon? Yes, Wimbledon.
No, I'm just thinking, I'm the nerd. I'm looking forward to
Yeah, to
parliamentarian
reconciliation,
rulings, and you guys have lives.
vacation, tennis. Yeah.
Yes, some of us have lives, not big ones, but small ones. Anyway, thank you all. Thank you, Contrarians, for joining us. We so appreciate you. Have a great day, everyone. Take care.
Bye.